Mr. President, one of the troubling aspects of this conference report is that the appropriators airdropped three very significant spending bills into the text during conference. In other words, three bills without any debate, discussion, amendment here was airdropped into this pending legislation. The three bills are the Labor, Health and Human Services, Financial Services, and General Government, the State Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. Combined, these three bills spend over $237 billion and contain 2019 earmarks. I think it's really remarkable and unacceptable that the Senate is willing to approve the expenditure of such huge sums without the opportunity to debate and amend their content. Now, Mr. President, on the other side of the aisle, in fact, I see the senator from Hawaii, he will say, well, this is the way we've had to do business before, and we have to do this because of the pressure of time and the fiscal year ended, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we get back to this whole line that we heard for an entire year and even in early this year about change, about how we were going to change things in Washington. We're going to change the way we do business. President Obama said about the last omnibus bill, which was passed last March, 3 months into the Obama administration, he said, and I quote President Obama, "The future demands that we operate in a different way than we have in the past. So let there be no doubt. This piece of legislation must mark an end to the old way of doing business and the beginning of a new era of responsibility and accountability that the American people have every right to expect and demand." So what are we doing today? The exact same thing that we were doing before. And here's a quote from the White House Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, what he said about the last omnibus bill. Remember, this is the one we weren't going to do anymore. Second, this is last year's business. He was talking about the one we passed in March. And third, most importantly, we're going to have to make some other changes going forward to reduce the ultimate number and bring the transparency. And that's the policy that he enunciated in his campaign, Bob Schieffer. But it sounds to me like what he's about to do here is say, well, I don't like this, but I'm going to go ahead and sign it. He's talking about the last omnibus bill, but I'm going to warn you, you don't ever do it again. Is that what's happening here? Emanuel, in not so many words, yes. And then, of course, the Senate Majority Leader said about the last omnibus, quote, "We have a lot of issues we need to get to after we fund the government, something we should have done last year, but we could not because of the difficulty we had with working with President Bush." I wonder if we're going to blame President Bush for this one. We might. We blame him for almost everything. Rains, doesn't rain, whatever it is, let's blame President Bush. But the point is what this bill is, and another one that'll be coming up in a couple of days, is exactly the same business as usual, a pork barrel laden bill with increases in spending when the American people are hurting and in the worst possible way. The American people are hurting, and this piece of legislation, my friends, has a whopping $11.3 billion, or the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Appropriations Bill has $11.3 billion, or 7% increase, a 7% increase in spending over last year's spending level. Where are we? This is America. Americans are hurting. There's 10% unemployment. People can't stay in their homes. They can't keep their jobs. And so we pass in a piece of legislation with 1,749 earmarks just in the Labor, Health, and Human Services of over $806 billion. Want to hear a few of them? They're fascinating. They're fascinating. Here's my favorite. Here's my favorite of all, and there's a lot of really good ones in there. $2.7 million to support surgical operations in outer space at the University of Nebraska. Now, I assure my colleagues, I am not making that up. That is an appropriation in this bill. Let me repeat. Support $2.7 million to support surgical operations in outer space. Now, there's a lot of compelling issues before the American people. Surgical operations in outer space at the University of Nebraska. I guess the University of Nebraska has some kind of expertise that they need $2.7 million so that we could support surgical operations in outer space. I wonder when the next surgical operation is scheduled in outer space. Maybe we ought to go into that. I mean, I will be spending more time on the floor on this, I say to my colleagues, but $30,000 for Woodstock Film Festival Youth Initiative. You know, Woodstock was a pretty neat experience, but do we need to spend $30,000 to revisit that one? There's $200,000 to renovate and construct the Laredo Little Theater in Texas. My friends, the next time you're in Laredo, be sure to stop by the theater and see $200,000 of your money, which is going to renovate and construct this little theater in Laredo, Texas. $500,000 for the Botanical Research Institute of Texas in Fort Worth. $200,000 for a visitor center in Bastrop, Texas. I'm not sure I pronounced that right, B-A-S-T-R-O-P, Texas. Now, it's $200,000 for a visitor center there in Bastrop. Has a population of 5,340 people. So we're going to spend $200,000 of my taxpayers' dollars to build them a visitor center. $200,000 for design and construction of the GARAPAN public market in the Northern Marianas Islands. $500,000 for development of a community center in Custer County, Idaho, population 4,342. If my math is right, that's about $100 per person. 200 right here in our nation's capital, $200,000 for the Washington National Opera for set design, installation, and performing arts at libraries and schools. They have an operating budget of $32 million. Their website says the secret of its success, it's due to its position without the crucial government support typical in most world's capitals. And then, of course, we always get back to Hawaii. $13 million on fisheries in Hawaii, 9 projects throughout the islands, ranging from funding the Big Eye tuna quotas, the marine education and training, and coral research. So the list goes on and on. Next time you're in New York, go to the Lincoln Center. You'll see that we are spending $800,000 of your money for jazz at the Lincoln Center. Jazz lovers rejoice. And for those who are not jazz lovers, we've got $300,000 for music programs at Carnegie Hall. $3.4 million for a rural bus program in Hawaii. Apparently the $1.9 million in the 09 omnibus was not enough. In other words, we gave $1.9 million for this rural bus program in Hawaii, so we got to now give them $3.4 million more. Custer County, Idaho, population 4,342 as of the year 2000. I'm sure they've grown since. $500,000 for development of a community center in Custer County, Idaho. So the list goes on. The list goes on. And then, of course, it's loaded with controversial policy riders that should have been debated in the Senate. In the Department of Labor bill, the conference rescinds $50 million from unobligated immigration enforcement funds under Section 286 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. This will result in a decrease in the enforcement of immigration law. I guarantee you that if that provision had been debated here on the floor of the Senate, that $50 million would never have been removed. The conference agreement includes new language providing authority to International Labor Affairs Bureau, the agency charged with carrying out the Department of Labor's international responsibilities. It may be a worthy program, but it should be addressed in legislation. There's so many others that are policy provisions in this bill which have not been authorized, which is supposed to be done by authorizers. The conference agreement provides for $35 million for the Delta Health Initiative. The Delta Health Initiative provides a service to individuals in only one area of the country, the Delta region in Mississippi. Now, I visited the Delta region in Mississippi, and there are severe health needs. But couldn't we authorize this program? Couldn't we authorize it? Couldn't we have the proper debate and discussion? The list goes on and on. Of course, there is $25 million for patient safety and medical liability reform demonstrations that was not included in the House or Senate. Medical liability reform demonstrations. There's a demonstration project already in being. It's called the state of Texas, where they have reduced medical malpractice costs dramatically, and the physicians and caregivers are flowing back into the state of Texas. Mr. President, I'll be talking more later this afternoon, about all the pork and earmarking that's in this bill. And I have to tell you that the anger out there and the frustration is at an incredibly high level. And those of us who, and I'm sure that most of us do, spend a lot of time at town hall meetings and hearing from our constituents, know that there's a level of anger out there, the likes of which I haven't seen. Here they are, hurting so badly because they can't keep their homes, their jobs. My home state of Arizona is number 2 in the country of homes that the mortgage payment is higher than the home value, 48% of the homes in my state. So here we are with 10% unemployment, with deficits this year, $1.4 trillion. And so there are dramatic increases, 7% increase in spending in one, 14% increase in spending in the other. They don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. Americans are having to tighten their belts. My home state of Arizona is in a fiscal crisis where they're having to cut services to our citizens because we can't print money in Arizona. They only print money here. And here we are with omnibus appropriations bills with as high as 14% increase in spending, loaded down with billions of dollars worth of pork barrel projects. I predict to my colleagues that the anger out there will be manifested in a number of peaceful ways, including in the ballot booth. They're sick and tired of this. I saw a poll yesterday where the approval rating of members of Congress has fallen below that of the approval rating for used car salespersons. Now, I think it was at 4%, as I recall the poll. I haven't met any of the 4%. I haven't met anybody who approves of what we're doing. And this exercise that we're in right here on December the 12th, 2009, with a pork-laden omnibus appropriations bills which frivolously and outrageously spend their dollars when they're struggling to keep their heads above water, is something that is going to be rejected sooner or later by the American people. I've warned my colleagues. The American people are sick and tired of this. They didn't like it before. Now they're fed up with it. We'll be hearing more this afternoon. So, Mr. President, I rise today to raise a point of order under Rule 28 against H.R. 3288, the Omnibus Appropriations Bill. I do this to ensure that this bloated legislation is not permitted to proceed to full consideration by the Senate. Specifically, Rule 28 precludes conference reports from including policy provisions that were not related to either the House or the Senate version of the legislation as sent to conference. Several provisions, including in Divisions D, Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services and Education, and related agencies Appropriations Act of this omnibus bill are out of scope and were never considered on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Mr. President, I raise a point of order that the conference report violates the provisions of Rule 28.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
I move to waive all applicable sections of Rule 28 and ask for the ayes and nays.
Is there a sufficient second?